Hello and welcome back. We're here at the very end of 1 Peter. We'll be heading into 2 Peter next week. So let's talk about what we've gone over so far. Peter is addressing this universal question. This question all Christians have is, how should I live? What does it look like to be a disciple? The interesting thing is that when we talk about Christianity, so often we talk about a Christless Christianity. It's a Christianity that focuses on moralism and what we do, or perhaps more notably, what we appear to be doing, rather than a changed identity. And what that identity is Christ. But Peter notes that our changed identity isn't that we're supposed to look like Christ, or that our whole justification before God will be something that happens by how closely we live towards Christ, but instead will be how we look to Christ as the one who has already fulfilled the covenant, fulfilled what we need. We've been dealing with all of that, and so here we are in this final section. In many ways, this will be Peter tying all of this up together. And there's a lot going on here. We could indeed have spent an entire year just dealing with 1 Peter alone. The concepts in here are relevant today. And I think it's also important and worth noting that many of us would be better off just bypassing the Christian living section in our local bookstores or viewing online on the online bookstores, and instead simply go back to the Bible. What did the disciples, what did the apostles, what do the Gospels tell us that it means to be a Christian? Peter's going to be saying some things that will make us very uncomfortable. We have to remember, of course, that discomfort is the cardinal sin of our contemporary world. Discomfort is what we avoid at all costs. And yet Peter tells us that the cost of discipleship goes right through discomfiture, indeed, right through pain and suffering, because this is the journey that Christ himself made. The disciple can't be greater than the teacher. The disciple must follow after the leader. And that's what Peter is going to state here at the end. But in that, there is a hope. It's the realization that the promises of this world could never satisfy us. And deep down, we all know that's the case, don't we? We all know the world can't satisfy us. Or the promises of this world can't satisfy us. Or the empty dreams or delusions or works or whatever in this world will never be able to satisfy us. And Peter says, good. You know that's true. What you've known to be true actually is true. With that in mind, we should go ahead and get started. Now, we went up through parts of chapter 3. Let's go ahead and complete chapter 3 here. Before we do so, let's just go over kind of what we are dealing with here today. We are dealing with an apostle talking to people from the scattered churches throughout Asia Minor, in Anatolia, that central portion of Turkey. We're finding people who are trying to figure out what to do after they believe. And we're going back to the basics of the gospel promise. There's quite a lot there, isn't there? A lot to talk about and think about, and a lot of questions that we have. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We're probably going to have to dig into the Greek a little bit, but if you just hang with me, I promise everything will come out all right. And I hope you get a deeper understanding of what it is that Peter is trying to talk about here. Now, we go in here, who will harm you? What an odd question to be asking. Peter, of course, knows who's going to harm them. He knows about the persecutions that they are going to face. It's more than just a rhetorical question. It's not naivete. Instead, it's meant to ask this question. When trouble comes, who do you look to save you? I think about this quite a lot. Nothing causes me so much anxiety than when I open up that envelope and I read that there is a bill that is coming due. Maybe it's for the doctor, maybe it's a parking ticket, maybe it's something else entirely. Of course, there's anxiety because I look to my bank account to help me out. I think I can control it, but anyone who's had to make ends meet understands that it often feels like it's out of our control. Now, I'm not telling you you shouldn't worry or go through life completely numb to the problems of this life, numb to the issues. Instead, what Peter is talking about, and what I would tell you, is the fact that you should put everything in perspective. Peter understands that we are going to go up against people. We are going to be at odds with people. But instead, we need to look to God and God alone. Now, there is an interesting word, zealotes. The zealots, we hear this word even today. Someone's a zealot. They're a fanatic for something. In the ancient world, this was a derogatory term for a group of extremists who wanted to throw off the yoke of Roman rule. Here, this political movement, here Peter is appropriating the name for Christians. We are to be zealous, and zealous for God alone. Indeed, this word, zealotos, is also translated as jealous. It is the single-minded focus, the focus that God has for you and for me and for everybody, and it's the same one that you and I should have for God and Christ alone. He says Peter says, even if you suffer for righteousness, you are blessed, therefore. This reminds us of the Beatitudes. Here in Matthew chapter 5, we hear, blessed, Makarios, be happy. This word of blessing, this word of happiness comes when we realize that our life is built on Christ alone, when He is our destination, the one to whom we are journeying. And so, how does this happen? How is this achieved? What we are supposed to do is adopt an apostolic or apologetic posture. Now, sanctify your hearts in Christ first. What a backwards way for us to live. The world is all concerned with trying to make sure that we perform the right functions. It doesn't matter what you're doing, just so long as you're looking good doing it. I can remember listening to an interview with the writer Adam Gopnik talking about the differences he found with people working in France and the people working here. Gopnik observed that many people here in America, when you go up and you ask them what they do, they say, I'm doing this, but I really want to be at that. I'm working here at this grocery store, but I really want to be a writer. I'm working here at this coffee shop, but I really want to be in music. And on and on and on. When he went to France, though, he said the people there respected all the jobs, not just the ones that were popular. A person working at a coffee shop wants to be a coffee roaster. A person who works in the meat market or the vegetable stand, that's what they want to do. They're tied to their family and their job. And here I think we see a similar thing. The Christian can't just perform being a Christian. You'll drive yourself mad. Instead, you have to adopt the apologetic posture. Now, of course, this word apology, it means something different today than it used to. The word comes from the Greek apologos, which means to give a defense. And that's how most of our translations render the word apologia, to offer a defense. But it's more than just a defense. It's a whole reason for why we're doing it. It's not an excuse. It's not an I'm sorry. And it isn't even so much a way of protecting ourselves. Instead, it is to be done with gentleness and respect. I can remember one famous negotiator talking about arguments. And when he would do hostage negotiations, one thing would be in the front of his mind. You can win the argument or you can win the day. You have this choice in front of you. You can choose whether or not you want to be right, or you can choose whether or not you want to move forward in a relationship with this person. That doesn't mean that you sacrifice yourself. It doesn't mean that you sacrifice your principles. What it does mean is the point of what you believe is less for you to feel good about what you believe, and more about whether or not what you believe is something that someone else finds worth believing too. Think about some of your most important things in life, your most important relationships. Think about your marriage. I think about this quite a lot. When you argue with your spouse, and you are going to argue with your spouse, one of the things for you to keep in the front of your mind is the fact that you love this person. You may not feel that as pleasantly at the moment, but the fact that you're arguing with the person does mean that you do want to be with them. You don't walk away. So here, when we are arguing with our loved ones, one way to turn down the temperature is to go ahead and ask yourself, do I want to be right? Or do I want to be going in the common direction with this person? Do I want to get my point across? That'll take longer. It'll require more of you. But it's the way we are to argue when we are with those we care about, and it's the way we are to argue about our own faith. The goal is not to win the argument. The goal is to bear witness. Maybe we've messed that up. Maybe we Christians are not engaging with people with this understanding that what we believe is so true that we don't have to be brittle about it. We don't have to protect it. Maybe the gospel is strong enough that it can speak for itself. That's the reason, that's the defense, that's the apology that you are supposed to make. It's the reason why you do what you do. After all, isn't that what an apology is? This is why I did this. With that in mind, we should probably keep moving on. Here we get into verse 18. This is a foundational argument. Oops. Look at me, skipping past things. Well, this is the reason why. I offer an apology. I forgot all about this slide. This is the reason why we do what we do. a good conscience, integrity being something that people notice. In fact, go ahead and read what the number one reason is why people leave the church. People don't leave the church or say they leave the church because they were upset about this, that, or the other thing. They found inauthenticity to be at the center of most of the reasons why people leave the church. In fact, people are willing to go ahead and accept you more, even if they disagree with you. I know this myself. I have many friends who don't agree with how I read Scripture. I think I read it right. After all, I wouldn't hold to something I didn't truly believe in. But the interesting thing is they understand that I come to it with a great degree of humility towards what I believe, and also a great degree of humility when I reach out to others. And they respect that, even if they don't agree with my positions. This is what Peter is talking about. When you have a good conscience, integrity will follow. Slanderers are put to shame. People who talk about us, who only use words to hide the truth. Eventually they are found out. But the reverse happens. When a pastor or a church behaves without integrity, when the world calls them to live up to their standards, they slander the church. It is better to do good than, it is better to suffer doing good than evil, if God wills it. You will not escape the fact that we live in a fallen world. Let me be clear. We are not to look for suffering. We are not to run headlong into suffering. We are not to pretend that we become better Christians because we suffer. Instead, we need to be honest that this world is not our home, that this world is fallen. This is a world where there is sin and heartache and pain and death. And trying to pretend that that is not the case is the quickest way to inauthenticity, I can assure you. Instead, we all yearn for a world where all the bad things come untrue. And so we proclaim that and live with integrity. And if the world slanders us or persecutes us for our hope, not for our anger, then we have borne witness to a great hope that people are yearning to lay hold of. I hope you realize none of this is something that you can possibly attain. Here we are going to get into some Greek. Now the word that is translated here, haughty, because it can mean that, of course. But it's a deeper meaning. It really is pulling from the original. Let's go back to our Bibles here. That's always a good thing to do, by the way. For Christ, or rather because Christ, also died for sins once and for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit. Now, there's a lot of stuff going on here, and again, I hate to be harping on the Greek, but it is important to slow down sometimes and read, and there is so much here. Because of this, because Christ did this, because Christ died once and for all. Right now, there is a popular movement to speak of cultural Christianity, which states that because there's so much good and beneficial things going on in the world today. Because of that, you and I should become cultural Christians. We don't need to worry about whether or not Christ died or rose for us. We don't need to worry about whether or not Jesus Christ is truly God and truly human. No, we just need to know the utilitarian aspect that Christianity has led people to do some pretty remarkable things. I'm not willing to be so mercenary with the gospel. Are you? Instead, what Peter is saying is, you will never be able to be good enough. You will never be able to measure up to God's unbelievably high standards. But because Christ died once and for all, that's what this word hapax means. I know there's a little accent there. It means hapax. Hapax is this word. It doesn't just mean once. It is the only time. It is a black swan event. It is a once in an eternity moment. Because God died for you. Because of this, you were able to endure living in a fallen world. The atonement has been completed. It's done. The task is over. In a world where we feel like we constantly have one more box to check, at least you and I can check that one box. I am good with God because Christ died for me, because the righteous one died for the unrighteous. That's what we get here. Diakios haper idikon, the righteous on behalf of the unrighteous. I told you, there's Greek, but it's beautiful, isn't it? It gets deeper. It's more emphatic. You're not having to go ahead and parse through, well, what does this mean? Or what does that mean? Or maybe they meant something else. The Greek is emphatic. Because the righteous one died for the unrighteous one, that means you, that means me, that means everyone you'll meet. Because of that once and for all event, it is finished. Now, let's keep on going because this is really good stuff. I promise there won't be as much Greek. This word here, hina, imas, humas, prosagain. Can you tell I can't speak Greek very well? To theo, a priestly word because he presents us before God. Christ proclaims us before God. He presents us before God. He has been put to death in the flesh and made alive in spirits, and the realm of death therefore gives way. So let's continue on with the reading here because this is what we're dealing with here. He has entered into the realm of death. Now, some people get hung up on this, don't they? They might get hung up and they think to themselves, oh, well, maybe he's going to go save the deaf. What he's talking about here is that Christ is so powerful that when he shouts into the darkness, he brings forth light. What he is talking about is he's trying to get us to remember the Genesis account of creation, how the word was spoken into the darkness. To get back to the John 1 account, where John, in the Gospel of John, says, the light has come into the world, and the darkness has not overcome it. This is what it is for us. So, what does this mean? How is this even accomplished? We ask ourselves. What does this mean for us, as Luther might have it? Well, this proclamation comes here at the flood. So, like I said, the gospel is proclaimed in prison. I don't want you to get lost in this point here. The Lutheran reading is that the proclamation is the proclamation of victory. This is not Jesus Christ necessarily going down to hell and preaching hell, although there are some theories about that. We don't know. In fact, we don't know what is outside of this story here in life. What we do know is that Christ is strong enough that he is able to go ahead and set the captives for you and me, even though we might not see it. So this triumph is not necessarily a second chance, but rather the Lord stepping into the darkness. Now, just as we talked about before, with Christ bringing in this creation, this is a new creation, there's another new creation story we have in the Old Testament, and that's of Noah. Noah, we are told, a few are saved through water while the world stood under judgment. 8 people are rescued, and the rest of the world ends up collapsing into its problems, into its sin. It gives itself over to its self-destruction. Peter is going to set up a comparison next. This is probably one of the most famous passages in all of 1 Peter. And I think you and I need to focus on this quite a lot here. Because if we don't get this quite right, it won't give us the assurance and the comfort that Peter intends. And yes, I do apologize. There will be Greek coming up. So let's talk about baptism. Now, the word here that Peter starts off with we read here, baptism. Let's go ahead and read this. We'll start here at 18 because that seems to be how everything connects. For Christ also died for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he went and preached to the spirits in prison, who formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah during the building of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were saved through the water. Now, here we go. Baptism, which corresponds to this. I don't like that. The Greek would be, and corresponding to this, baptism now saves you. Not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a clear conscience through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven, is at the right hand of God, with angels, authorities, and powers subject to him. Corresponding to this is baptism, which now saves you. Now, there's a lot going on here. First off, corresponding to this is a weak word. The corresponding in the Greek comes before baptism. Baptism now saves you as one complete thought. And corresponding to this, the word corresponding we think of as one-to-one. That is not how the Greek would understand it. The Greek would use this word antupon. Antitupon. Antitupon here means something which is the fulfillment. Okay, let me put it this way. Let's imagine, we'll use Plato's cave theory. Didn't think you were going to get into philosophy, did you? Well, think again. Plato's cave theory was the basis of the hit movie The Matrix, in which everyone realized they were just living in a simulation. In Plato's cave theory, the shadows projected on the wall were all that these prisoners had ever known, and then once a man escapes and goes out and he sees real trees and the real sunlight, and Plato is saying that this person who has seen these real things, the way things were meant to be, now has to go back to the land of shadows and explain that what people are looking at are really just the shadows projected on the wall. Peter is saying the same thing. What was once the shadow, we have now seen the real thing. The destruction of the destructed, or the world in the midst of destruction. Just as Noah was rescued, how much more are we rescued from the new flood? The flood which will get rid of all the debris and detritus and all the problems of this world, and then be remade with a new heaven and a new earth. Christ's work on the cross is the antupon of Noah's first work, or Noah's first story there. In this way, baptism is not just a removal or a cleansing. We're not just getting rid of the grime so that we can dirty it again. Instead, it is a once and for all action as we have been rescued out of the old and resurrected into the new. There's no magic water here, though. Instead, it is the promise of God working in, with, and under on this. You can't clean it up. This is really how Lutherans view baptism and why we view it very differently from a lot of our neighbors, our fellow Christians. Many Christians in America believe that baptism is a new cleansing. It is somehow or other a continuation of the cleansing rituals. It is an outward sign of an inward change. Instead, Lutherans believe it is a new birth. People say you have to make a decision before you are baptized, but Lutherans say your deciding on God is irrelevant since Christ has already decided to die for you. Whether you accept your baptism or not is the keystone there of whether or not you have separated yourself from God. But this is more than just a cleansing. This is a new birth. In your own life, the biggest decisions in your life, I hate to break it to you, were not decisions you made. You may have decided to ask that person to marry you, but you didn't decide to meet that person. You may have decided to go ahead and take that job, but you didn't decide to have the skill sets or be born with the skill sets that allowed you to do that job or be passionate about that job. In fact, you don't get to decide when you're born, and you probably, hopefully, won't decide when you go. The biggest decisions in your life were ones that were fully in God's control, and that goes for baptism as well. You can either accept or reject it, just as you can accept or reject the big decisions that have been made for your life. But that's it. And so, just as you and I have these wonderfully big decisions in our life, we have this wonderful big decision with faith as well. It is a formal pledge. That's the final word here. See, I told you. You could learn to decide to speak Greek better, or you could be like me. Eperotema. I'll get there in the end. Eperotema is a formal pledge. It's a covenantal transaction. It is legally binding. In the waters of baptism, God has bound you to Him through the precious blood of Jesus Christ, through the promises that He has made for you. This is something He asks that you just simply accept this term of agreement. Now, it is grounded in the resurrection. Baptism saves through the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He is its ground. And Jesus has now been given the authority through the ascension because He sits with the angels and other authorities. Once He who emptied Himself of glory now sits all glorious alongside the Father in heaven. The baptismal font, by the way, over here is Luther's baptismal font. It doesn't matter where you got baptized. What matters is that the words were proclaimed to you. And now you are Christ's through the waters of baptism. With that in mind, let's continue on. Welcome back. We're continuing on here in the 4th chapter of 1 Peter. Talked a lot about baptism, and honestly, we could talk a lot more about it. But instead, we are going to keep on moving. If you have any questions, of course, we'll try and put up a separate slide just on baptism, but we're going to kind of keep moving here. All right. Now, here in chapter 4, Peter tells us to go ahead and equip ourselves. Now, what is interesting is oftentimes this word for equip is arm yourself. Since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves with the same thought. For whoever has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin. Now, this word arm yourselves has a very military overtone. In fact, the Greek word is hoplon. A hoplon was a tool or an instrument. And it was interesting that the Greek soldiers, the notable Greek soldiers, were the hoplites. These were actually men who were equipped with equipment. That's literally what their word means. So there is a bit of a military term to it, but it's deeper than that. The hoplites weren't known as soldiers, but rather people who were equipped to go ahead at a moment's notice. One could almost think of them as like Minutemen from the American Revolution. They were equipped at any moment, not to fight, but to defend that which is most important to them. Peter would say that would be your faith. So the tool here is a way of thinking less as a weapon and more as a tool to accomplish a mission. We are to arm ourselves, but a better translation would probably be to equip ourselves. We go ahead and we pick this understanding. Also, maybe a better way to look at this is a craftsman knows exactly the right kind of tool to use at any given time. Maybe that tool for us as Christians would be reason. Maybe that's compassion. Maybe that's good works. There's a proper tool for everything, and we are to be equipped at any given moment. Now, when we suffer, though, we will suffer as we hold on to, even as we are armed, even as we are equipped. Anyone who has done any kind of work knows that. Just a few weeks ago, I went ahead and I had barbecue and was fixing barbecue for people. Anyone who's barbecued in a Texas summer understands that there is a bit of suffering for this, to accomplish the goal, to serve others. Maybe not the best illustration, but it's the one that comes to mind most quickly for me. And when we are equipped, we find ourselves using the tools that we have become comfortable with. Now, the old life is constantly going to be chasing what the world wants. We are going to have temptations to just walk away from the barbecue pit, as it were, and just sit down in the air conditioning. Look for the comfortable answers that this world promises, which will never satisfy us. But instead, we live for Christ, and we have been given this wonderful gift. We are equipped. We live now for the will of God and not our own passing human fancies. The world may notice, and the world may resent it, and that's fine. They will have to give an account for what they did. We will have to give an account for what we did. A word of warning them. One of the easiest temptations for many of us Christians is to become so obsessed with what we do, and our identity is if we've made our identity as Christians, and Christ is not the one who has made our identity as Christians, that we somehow or other end up hurting the world. We don't use the tools that we have to build up, to help, to defend. We use it to attack. We begin to see enemies lurking all around. And we imagine that the life of the Christian is less about finding our identity in Christ and more about looking for enemies who might come against us. That is wrong. That is a lie straight from the depths of hell. Instead, we are to use that which Christ has given to you and to me in order to go ahead and work in his kingdom. His kingdom is, of course, near. The end of all things is near. But that's not for us to get panicky about. I remember growing up in the 90s. And in the 90s, there was this obsession with the end times. That the world was just around the corner. Apocalypse was just coming over the horizon. But instead, what we found was it never really arrived. The end has already come in the death of Jesus, in his resurrection, and the first fruits of the resurrection. But we know that God's will could happen at any given moment. When we become fixated on ourselves and this notion of Christendom, as if we can have a Christless Christianity ruling over the state or the governments of the world, we become paranoid. And we have no use for Christ. We have no use for the church. Instead, what we should do when we are faced with all of these issues, with all of the fact that we are proclaiming this new world while the old world is winding down, we need to be clear-headed and sober for the sake of your prayers. Our prayers, I find, take on deeper meaning when we realize our need. When we take seriously, if you believe that the world is coming to an end, you will pray diligently for Christ to be at work in it, and for him to show you places where you can come alongside him. So, we pray earnestly, and Peter tells us we love earnestly. Love covers that multitude of sins. It does not overlook the wrongdoing of the world. It does not say that the world's okay. That makes the apocalypse really feel like the end instead of the beginning. But earnest love keeps going when it seems as if the world isn't listening. I don't think we're facing anger in this world so much as apathy. There are a few people who are angry at Christianity. There are a few people that hate us. But most of them ignore us. And if we become angry and belligerent souls, they'll just stop listening even more. Instead, let us continue to love through the prayers that Christ has called us to pray. How can we do this? Well, Peter tells us, showing hospitality to one another without grumbling. First, start praying. Pray for that person that you heard about on the news that you disagree with. Pray for that person sitting next to you that you felt slighted you. Pray for that person you care about with whom you are having a difficult time. I find that when I pray for people that I have problems with, it's hard for me to hold on to hatred. Instead, we practice hospitality without grumbling. And then use whatever gift you have to serve others. The Bible is clear. We all have many gifts. And many of us believe that our gifts aren't as important as other gifts. As a pastor, I can tell you, there are people here who have very unique and particular gifts. And they're afraid to use them sometimes because they look at other people's gifts and they feel like that person is serving the kingdom so much better. But here's the thing, they're all serving the kingdom. Use the gifts. Find the gifts that God has given you and use those to glorify God. All of them. And so he ends here with this doxology. It's not a polite closing. It's a claim. Whatever dominion the culture thinks it holds, Christ holds it even stronger. Whatever the world tries to get you to use for its purposes, when you use it for Christ, you find that you grow closer to him. Now, after going through all of that wonderful talk, what happens when the fiery troubles happen? Well, first thing, don't be surprised when they do. What did you think was going to happen? You are proclaiming that this world is going to come undone, and this world thinks it's pretty hot stuff. So, of course, you proclaiming that there's a new world, a better world, just around the corner, that God is redeeming that world, is going to put you at loggerheads with this world. There will be a burning, a refining fire that will come. But you should rejoice. Not rejoice in your sufferings, not rejoice because you are suffering, but rejoice that the world is showing you its hands. That the world is demonstrating that it does not have a true hope, but rather your hope is in Christ. And so you no longer have to pretend. You no longer have to worry. Many of us have felt this way, haven't we? I certainly feel this way whenever I think, oh gosh, things are really difficult right now. What I realize then is that the devil is having to show his hands. That we have to finally acknowledge that he exists. He's glad to sit by and sit back and pretend like he's not here. But the more you proclaim, the more he has to. All right. But the judgment starts with us, not as a threat, but a reorienting perspective. If the righteous is scarcely saved, then what of the ungodly? Those who suffer according to God's will, entrust your souls to the faithful Creator. What is going on here? What we are seeing here is the fact that the judgment of the world will begin with us, and we will have no excuses when we try to rest it on our own goodness, our own power, rather than Christ's completed work. So we must continue to proclaim Christ as he is the center of our lives. And that's more of the same. With that in mind, let's go ahead and continue. Well, here we are at the very end of 1 Peter. And there's just a little bit left to go as we hear the benediction, as Peter reassures us. Now, Peter speaks of a shepherd of the flock. And as such, we are to clothe ourselves with humility. Tie it on, wear it. The shepherd willingly, not under compulsion, eagerly, not for shameful gain. Nor is the shepherd domineering. What is he talking about here? Well, obviously he's talking about Jesus, That's always the first and best way to handle things. Look to Christ. He is the great shepherd of the flock. But other people who are the under-shepherds, or as one of my friends called us, sheepdogs, are the ones who have to corral and lovingly care for others. In many ways, Luther would say, we are part of a priesthood of all believers. Some of us, such as myself, have a special and unique call, which makes these recommendations and commands of Peter all the more urgent. He doesn't pull rank as an apostle, notice. Rather, he himself is going about doing this very same work that he asks others to do. A pastor will not be here just because we have to be. Just as a Christian today will not be here just because we have to be. You know, there's a lot of stuff that causes us a lot of anxiety in the churches. Oh no, we say. There are so many people leaving the church. What do we do? Well, for a long time, the church allowed people to just simply coast. Now, I would rather have everybody coming to church rather than being outside the church. After all, you're hopefully more likely to hear the gospel inside the doors of the church than outside the doors of the church. But at the same time, I think we understand that the church had led people to be complacent. Instead, the people who show up at church are people who are making a conscious decision. They are saying, there is no place I'd rather be on a Sunday morning than trying to get closer to God, even with the imperfect people standing right next to me. That is a beautiful thing. And we are witnessing a declaration of people who are not expecting anything else in being a Christian. This allows us a great degree of humility. No one can truly be domineering as a pastor, especially not in these day and age. Rather, we become examples. That's really what brings people to Christ. When people see that your faith is not just a performance, it's not something you just put on when the mood suits you, but rather is a hope that comes from the very depths of your being. That is what draws people to Christ. Therefore, humble yourselves. This famous painting is supposedly of Jesus passing by Peter. I think Peter has the exact same reaction that you and I have towards the cross when we really think about it. And yet Peter still followed along the way that Christ had pointed him. We're to clothe ourselves with humility, therefore, towards one another. We're to tie it on, to wear it. We're to cast all of our anxieties on Christ because he cares for us. Pause and think about that. Someone once said the difference between fear and anxiety is this. Fear is the realization that you have a problem and that it's causing you distress. Anxiety is being in that state of distress all the time. It is being afraid of fear. We have a lot of little things to make us anxious all the time. The world will never cease manufacturing little anxieties. But Christ has promised to take care of them. This gets us back to the beginning, back when I was talking about receiving those little anxious-inducing notes in the mail. Of course, I want to get through it. Of course, I need to monitor my bank account. Of course, I should not be irresponsible. But at the same time, I should also understand that even that won't fix my anxieties. Only when I cast them on Christ will my anxieties disappear. And then we end with the wonderful phrase, your adversary, the devil, prowls like a roaring lion. Be sober, be watchful. We are being hunted and stalked, but Christ is bigger than that. So resist him and stand firm. You're not alone. Christ has given us himself and the church. The God of all grace will go ahead and restore, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. Peter lays out 4 verbs. Jesus just doesn't give us some sort of ambiguous, sure, maybe I'll help you if it's convenient. Instead, he promises to be there himself to restore us, to confirm us, to strengthen us, to establish us. You and I, as Luther said, would be undone if the devil were to come at us. But now a champion comes to fight, who God himself elected. Those 4 promises are not anything you and I can accomplish, not anything you and I can do. Rather, they are things which God himself does for us. And so, we end with the benediction. This is the true grace of God. Stand firm in it. He then greets from Rome with Mark. I love how these letters end, where he's giving call-outs to the other people. And we see just how big the church is. Sometimes we think the church is just the well-known people, but it's all the other people who go alongside, walk alongside, as the apostles complete the mission which God has given to his entire church. And finally, there's a peace to all who are in Christ. And with that, we conclude 1 Peter.